This is the report of our group. Today we will talk about software implementation. Software implementation is the phase in the software development life cycle, which is the realization of the intended software in a particular programming environment. It is a process that transforms our design's representation of the software into a programming language. We must be able to accurately translate our design into the corresponding implementation depending on the features of the programming language. Conversely, the choice of the programming language largely depends on the nature of the application we are implementing. In retrospect, this phase is one of the culminating activities in the development and simply follows the preceding phases of the life cycle of the software: the planning, requirement analysis, and design. Software implementation consequently affects the next stage: testing, verification, and maintenance. Software development has been viewed before as one activity, that is, software implementation. As we have processed through the modules of this course, we found that this is not the case. Software implementation only covers about 10% of the developmental effort. Although its roles seem to be less than usually viewed, this phase is also important as the other phases. We can formally define a programming language as a notation for expression computations. We want to express our designs into another formal notation with its own rule of syntax and semantics. Let us take for instance, two people speaking two different languages, say English and Filipino, where both cannot speak the other language. They will need an interpreter to translate a sentence in one language into the other. We express the design of our software in different notations to capture the date representation and the data flow. These representations are to be transformed into a program in a certain programming languages. How precisely can we translate our designs into its implementation with minimal interpretation errors? How accurately can we capture the design details into programming language we have chosen? We also consider programming conventions that we can follow so that testing, verification, and maintenance will not be burdensome.
Sa pagde-develop ng software system, hindi tayo pwedeng basta na lang mamimili ng programming language dahil sa gusto lang natin o dahil sa tingin natin ay ito ang tama. May mga dapat tayong i-consider bago tayo mamili ng programming language para sa ide-develop nating software system. Sa pagpili ng programming language, kailangan ay nakadepende ito sa nature ng application. Appropriate ang programming language sa characteristics ng data at data flow ng software system. Ang appropriate na language ay dapat piliin para sa particular application na naturally procedural, functional, logical, or object-oriented. Kailangan ding i-consider ang technical capabilities ng algorithmic, computational power, at data structures. Succeeding phases in the life cycle of the software. For development of system software, ang required na language ay kagaya ng C. For database application naman ay SQL or FoxPro. For business application ay COBOL. For object-oriented applications is C++. Mayroon ding mga psychological factors na nag-uugnay sa programming team. Coding standards. It consists of rules that all members of the implementing team must comply with. Coding standards are a collection of rules and guidelines that determine the programming style, procedures, and method for a programming language. Without the coding conventions, every individual in a team will settle their coding style. It will not be easy to maintain and debug the code in the near future. How do you maintain coding standard? Write comments and documentation. Perhaps one of the first things you learn as a developer is to comment your code. At first, it may seem like a waste of time, following the mentality of if they are a developer too, they can understand it. While it is true, some of the time commenting your code and providing proper documentation will guide the other developers through the algorithm and logic that you implemented. But don't get carried away and comment every line of code. Obvious code should be left as is. Write readable yet efficient code. Readable codes are easy to follow, yet use optimal space and time. When writing code, you may often want to write it in as little line as possible. Perhaps you can write an entire method or function in one line, but that only makes it harder to read and understand. Use helpers method. It's good practice to keep code concise and succinct. A method should only implement what it needs to do. If a part of your implementation does something else, put in a separate method and call that within your method. If avoidable, do not hardcore. The only things that should be hard-coded are constant. Write test cases. Don't forget the edge cases. 0s, empty strings or list, null, or etc. Write readable yet efficient code. Conform the coding standards of your current project. Every project or company has their own coding standards. Some might prefer one style over the other when it comes to things such as naming convention, file structures, and spacing. Use your IDE's drop-down. APIs are handy. Before implementing a method, make sure they're not available for you to use. You don't have to code it. You are just import the functionality. It makes a developer life super easy. Pair programming code review. These are very helpful when it comes to refactoring your code. Others might see better implementation to optimize your code or just make your code more elegant. It also ensures that developers adhere to standards and the work is double-checked. In addition to all that, it is a wonderful way for developers to learn from each other way. Back up and save your work often. Enough said. Dead battery, blackout, software glitch, fire, nuclear disaster, all of these may result in loss of data. Making sure you save often and back up your code in some kind of version control system is a simple way to ensure that your code stays safe. These standards are advantageous in two ways. It helps each programmer to be organized, thus will necessarily commit fewer mistakes in coding. It will help in the next stages in the development, in debugging, testing, and maintaining.
Hi, my name is Bernard James Anglo Mendoza from BSIT 3B, and I'm here to report about coding style. As programmers, we need to keep our code as simple as possible with clarity. Dapat po, pag yung sa code natin, dapat simple lang siya, Tapos, ano rin po, hanggat pwede nating paiksiin, gawin natin, pero dapat klaro pa rin siya. We need consider several aspects: code documentation, data declaration, statement construction, and formatting. Code documentation is very important, and I will discuss that in the next section. Data declaration needs to be consistent and meaningful. Dapat po sa pagde-declare ng data, dapat consistent ka sa kung anong gusto mo, or parang anong gusto mong palabasin doon, or parang pinupunto mo. Dapat rin may kabuluhan yung gusto mo doon na ipakita o ipalabas. Tapos, you must give names to variable that will help in the debugging and maintenance. Have you ever tried debugging a program that uses variable names that do not in any way relate to the function of the variable? Sometimes it's even better to just rewrite the whole thing rather than debugging a program that was written this way. Dapat daw po pag magbibigay ka rin ng variable sa pag magbibigay ka ng pangalan ng isang variable, dapat magiging helpful siya once na gusto mong mag-debug or may kailangan ayusin. Tapos, sinasabi rin po dito na minsan mas okay pang parang ulitin mo na lang lahat kaysa i-debug mo. Statement construction involves using statements that are simple and direct. Dapat sa statement construction, dapat daw po simple pero direkta. Kumbaga, simple pero siksik, at kumbaga kahit maikli lang siya pero nandun yung gusto mong palabasin, nandun yung pinaka-point mo. It is better to avoid complicated and nested alternatives. But if unavoidable, we format the text so that it could still be well understood by another individual. Some companies enforce formatting rules. For example, what is the maximum number of lines code should a single function be not more than the number of lines in your screen? What is this for? Well, again, for programming efficiency and debugging the maintenance convenience. Yung mga kumpanya po ay nagpapatupad ng mga rules kung saan may maximum or limit yung pwede mong i-code sa isang buong linya. Siguro po, kaya gusto ko ipatupad ito upang mas madaling masuri yung code kapag may gusto siyang palitan or gustong ayusin, or pag nagde-debug po. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat po.
Coding documentation. Aside from the external documents by the development team, each member of the coding team must integrate documentation in their code. These are the comments placed in certain portions of the code, indicating the functions and tasks being performed. It helps a lot to your efficiency in completing your task, and of course, in the debugging and maintenance. You might not think of it this way, but a good example of code documentation is a README file. For example, 1 is the function and number 2 is the task. I am Shaira Malinay from BSIT 3B. Thank you for listening.